We sort of have like an internal line, which is your robot speaks and we listen. And that's really what we're here to do.
Joe, coffee, tea, or something else? What fuels your mornings?
Definitely a coffee man. Flat white, very Australian coffee. As I
Uh,
understand it, it's maybe not so popular elsewhere.
I only recently, I say recently, last like 3 years, started having flat whites. I didn't even know they existed. Heard my mum ordering one. I was like, oh, what's that? But yeah, I love them. They're very good.
I think it's just a snob's latte,
Yeah.
It's,
Well, I find like where I order them, they tend to be kind of small, right? I don't like a lot of
Mm.
milk, so it's actually nice. Other than that, I just drink black coffee, but the flat whites, if you get them in the right place, they're just awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
When you were a kid, what did you think you'd do when you grew up?
I think I went through a lot of the same arc that I imagine a lot of people probably listening did too. Thought I was going to be an astronaut for quite some time.
Yeah.
When you're a very little kid, and then you sort of come to be a bit more pragmatic, and you're like, well, I'm pretty good with numbers. I like structured things. Maybe I'll be like an accountant or maybe an architect or something like that. And then, no, I realized sort of coming into the end of school that I was actually, quite strong at the hard sciences and sort of advanced math, and so ended up in engineering. But yeah, maybe one day could still be an astronaut. It seems like it might be on the cards.
I mean, it's the path. It's definitely one of the ways. What's one technology that you can't live without?
I mean, I think it's probably very similar, but Grok or ChatGPT, I probably use about 100 times a day.
Yeah.
It's been I think like I generally am just would self-describe, and my partner would probably say the same, as a very early adopter of things, and actually integrate them quite deeply into my life quite quickly.
Really?
And so I've been a big fan of your advanced voice mode ever since it sort of first came out 18 months ago. Put my headphones in, go for a walk, uh, you know, have it guide you through some kind of breakdown, or like a breakdown of a problem, or deep analysis. So I found that to be a really helpful way to, especially moving through this founding journey, like be able to
Yeah,
make hard decisions and things like that.
that's great. I definitely need to use it more. We actually had the founder of the infrastructure layer that enables that. They're called LiveKit. We had him on the show. So he was talking to us about how they built that zero latency kind of technology that OpenAI uses for it. And yeah, it's powerful. Super for that reason. I do it sometimes when I'm driving. I don't have spotty signal, having a big conversation. It's great.
I dropped the car into FSD, and then you could talk through the
Yeah.
Bluetooth. Because in Australia we haven't got Grok in the cars yet,
Okay.
but I imagine that probably isn't that far away on this end. I can't imagine a future where that doesn't become more and more normal. I almost find it now. I use it so often that I find it frustrating that I have to like open my phone, unlock it, open the app, create a new chat, type the message. Like I wanted to just be. I would be one of the people I imagine that would be using one of these like AR glasses as a normal glasses wearer, and would quickly adopt it and want to talk to the AI in it.
All the time. Yeah, I was just at CES last week and they had a bunch of new wearables and stuff like that, AI enabled ones for those very reasons, right? So you think when you're in the house, you've got Alexa or Siri just around that you can just talk to at any time. So yeah, yeah, interesting. Last one, if you could fast forward 10 years and see one impact that your work's made on the world, what would you want that to be?
I think that there's a real possibility that we're on the path, as certain people on X would say, and then other people would probably really vehemently disagree with, a future of abundance for people, where products and services are so cheap to deliver, and it will be driven a lot by automation. And I would hope that Alloy has been able to play some material part in allowing those companies that create that future to succeed faster, more reliably. The robots that they produce are safer, um, and more trustworthy.
Love that. Love that. Well, welcome to Machine Minds, everyone. I'm your host, Greg Tarusian, founder of Samson Rose, your robotics talent search partner. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Joe Harris, founder at Alloy. Thanks for being on the show today, Joe.
Oh, it's awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Let's jump into it. So, before Alloy, what experiences or even frustrations most directly shaped the idea behind the company?
Mhm. So as I alluded to, my background's in electrical engineering. I did my thesis in machine learning for telecommunication systems, which sounds perhaps a bit adjacent, but it actually is obviously very well connected because robotics companies often are building their robot stacks, in a way like a mini internet. They're often TCP connections between different nodes, and they're talking and sending messages. And so actually those experiences and the frustration of trying to collect the data, process the data, analyze the data, get value out of it for my thesis, and seeing how difficult that was back then. I then spent 10 years or so in my career getting obsessed with compounding and feedback loops. It's working in growth teams actually, and going from Atlassian's growth team in the software side over into a telehealth business, like a HIMSS style business in Australia that's since become a unicorn, and running the growth team there and the marketing, and finding that for the non-technical folk, there was a huge bottleneck on them accessing the underlying data that really mattered for them to do their job. You needed to be an engineer to play with the analytics, to build out experiments with feature flags and things like that. And so there really is a lot of inspiration in that experience from, those teams needing to find issues, create a hypothesis of how to solve it, ship a fix, measure that result as that feedback loop driving the business forward. That's actually very similar to what I remembered from my thesis that now robotics teams are doing, needing to gather production telemetry. How is the robot doing in the field testing? Find patterns and edge cases that are persistent over time, and then ship fixes and see if it fixes it. And then even more importantly, make sure it doesn't regress in the future.
Yeah.
So funnily enough, I think it really was the fact that I was a technical person going into this other domain around commercials and marketing and growth that taught me those sort of patterns where you can enable a marketing person using segment IO and maybe, amplitude or something like that to do these technical tasks around data integrations and transforms and things without needing to write a line of code. And so that was a real enabler for the engineering team to move fast and not need to worry about these things, and empower those teams to then also be able to get value. And so I just believe that there'll be versions of that in the robotics industry. And that was part of the initial seed that pushed us down this direction.
Love that. Was there a specific, like, this has to exist moment that kind of pushed you to start the company? Or was it just a gradual, this initial seed and realization that just took you on that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I did my founding steps, I think, in somewhat of a backwards order. So I quit my job without knowing exactly the business that I'd be starting. But I had these past experiences that just made me feel, when I saw that the space was moving as quickly as it was, I could just see that there's going to need to be a lot of tooling built. And this was like about a year ago, or a year and a half ago. And a lot of those things just didn't exist because, one, there's no large TAM of robotics companies at that time that need these things necessarily. But you can see that if you believe that the robotics industry will grow and become what it's now very obviously becoming, that you're going to need these infrastructures, because not every company should rebuild the exact same infrastructure. And so in that founding journey, I spoke to 20 founders, 30 founders through introductions in the robotic space. And they were all talking about the first 6 to 12 months. A lot of it was building out data infrastructure for sorting through the telemetry that came back from the robots. So that was the original kind of, this must exist and one person should build this, rather than everybody.
Everyone recreating the wheel. For listeners that obviously this is the first time that they're hearing about Alloy, is there an elevator pitch or like succinct one line that what do you tell your family? And they're like, what do you guys work on?
Yeah, well, I simply say that we make it easier for robotics companies to get value out of their robot data. Instead of needing to replay the data, 1 second per second in like a video kind of format, we look cross-sectionally over time. We give you that interpretation layer so that you can use it with Claude, you can use it via API, you can use it via our UI, but you typically want to understand what goes right and what goes wrong. And we just make that far, far easier for not just your engineers, but your whole company.
Yeah, very cool. Why do you think this problem, apart from, well, this might actually be the answer, apart from every company having to recreate the wheel or build it from scratch, but is there a reason you think that this problem's especially painful right now? Like, what changed in the market or in the technology landscape that made this such a glaring issue?
Well, I think there's a number of things, but really just trying to boil it down. One, the space just moves so fast. If you're on X and you're looking at each week all the new releases, the new strategies, the new architectures.
Yeah.
If you're trying to utilize all of those, it's a full-time job. And so you're either hiring people whose job it is to incorporate those things into your internal tools, or you're much better off partnering with a vendor that's spending all the time to do that. So that's one thing. It's like the space is accelerating, and so it is painful to make sure you're getting the most out of the technology you can. And two is the data is really, really multimodal and really, really large. So robots will often produce upwards of a gigabyte a minute, and that'll come across as image, video, numerical time series from a sensor stack and text logs. And yeah, there's if you're doing machine learning on that to try to find patterns and things of that nature, you need to be doing a lot of cross-modality work, which again, full-time job. And so yeah, you'll see these large mature companies like your Teslas and Waymos and whatnot, they do have large teams of hundreds of engineers working on these things. And a lot of those senior leaders have an angel invested in the company for that reason, because they know that the long tail of 1,000 other flowers that are blooming now just shouldn't and can't put that many headcount onto these types of problems, and they should just partner.
Awesome. What solutions, if any, actually existed before you guys? And if they did, because I'm not familiar, but why weren't they good enough?
There are some great solutions for parts of solving this problem. So as I mentioned, like replay, right? Replay is probably the main tool that people reach for.
Okay.
And in the early R&D phase, it's phenomenal, right? It gives you the context as the engineer to kind of sort of put yourself in the robot's shoes, understand what happened. It doesn't scale is the problem, right? If you imagine now you've got 10 robots or 100 robots that are running in parallel, how do you know even which, what you call ROS bags, or which files do you even replay? Right, that's the big question that is currently unanswered, and it's been a stage thing. So just up until now, there perhaps haven't been so many of those companies with the bigger fleets, and so the early R&D phase replay generally works fine. But the bigger companies that were larger than that, they had these internal teams that were building internal tools to do this kind of cross-sectional analysis. Plus, you think about like LLMs and all the recent changes. That's the other tail end of why, if you started your company 5 years ago, you're going to have a different architecture.
Yeah. It's definitely the right time to have something like this, because there's a big push, right? If you are a startup that's been around for the last 3 years, 5 years, your investors and also the market is pushing you to expand, deploy more robots, etc. Like if you onesies and twosies isn't really going to cut it. So you got to look at that tooling and your infrastructure layer for real scale and uptime, reliability, and the data.
And I think we see that with even the LLM cycle that we're in. We're now feeling like going into 2026, you really want to see these agent LLM businesses start to really deliver outcomes and value. Like all the experimentation budgets and things that drove a lot of the frothiness the last couple of years, perhaps us cycling out. And they're like, great, we're either going to churn or we're going to see real value.
Yeah.
And I think that same thing, as you say, having the demo where you do a backflip or you fold a shirt in isolation one time, that was the thing last year. I don't think, if you're valued, if you get $1 billion raised at, $30 billion val, not naming names, but if you're in that situation, you need to start showing some real traction. And so I do think that companies that are really focused on how do they perform in practice and scaling their fleets, those are going to be the ones that actually are here in 5 years.
Yeah. So from Alloy's core product, who feels the value first when they adopt it, start using it?
We've seen the most success early on, as the sort of first entry point to work with a team, has been their validation motion. So verification and validation. So you're going out and doing field testing. You want to verify and keep a report of what happened and how the robot did. And if you really break down our product, it does two things. One, it makes the data searchable in natural language, so you can type robot context in human, in English or any language, and find those moments again. And the secondary part is we summarize it, and we summarize a field test or a mission into this nice human readable report that rolls up all the raw data and gives you this thing, which is then easy to recontextualize yourself again in the future, or serves this really awesome memory for our agent, so that then you can ask these really complex questions over time around how is a certain firmware version performing versus another in certain environments. The types of things that would perhaps take days of analysis and digging for a validation engineer to now answer can be a triviality. And so those teams love it. But very naturally, it kind of branches out from there to perception teams. We're making it easy to organize and search the data. So if you can group and find holes in your perception and your models that do tracking and detection, it makes it way easier to find those gaps and fill them in your models. And then from there, like the commercial teams love it, because for often they're trying to sell or deal with existing customers, and they want to have examples of how does this robot do in this environment, and now they can find it themselves without needing to sort of bother an engineer.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. So who do you tend to target when you're selling or partnering with customers to adopt it?
Yeah, and it really has been that partnership model with them. Like obviously, every customer is, relatively unique. Often they're ROS based, or they don't have to be. We've worked with a number of different teams, and we've released open source data transformers to try to make it easier for people to manage their data.
Yeah.
We've got some really interesting, more open source stuff that is coming down the pipe as well, because we do believe that rising tide kind of floats all the boats here. Data shouldn't be as hard as it is, and that's our mission, is to make it easier. But so it will often be a validation engineer, validation lead, a CPO or a CTO would typically be the sort of buying committee, the people who are really invested in partnering with a team like us to allow them to, in one of our cases, we had a team where they used to do a field test and it would take a day to analyze the data when they came back. So every field test, 1 day. We automated that process, so now it takes 10 minutes and it's passive. It just happens in the background. Plus, they then now have this index library, and so they're now running 5 times as many tests per week. And you think
Wow.
about what does a test actually represent? It's not abstract. It represents a new update or change for the company they want to roll out to customers, but they need to check. And so now they can move 5 times faster shipping to customers. And so it is this kind of undervalued, underrepresented team, I think, as robotics teams grow, that just doesn't have a lot of tooling or service allocated to it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. As a startup, sometimes, or actually a lot of times, people can misstep and start going after the wrong thing, whether it's the wrong customer, wrong industry, etc. But even sometimes what to build. How did you decide early on what not to build and keep focused on where you're at?
And I think that's the story of perhaps the next 10 years, to be honest, not just for our company, but for what it means to build generally. If the cost of creation of software is going down, and you can just use Claude Code and ship a new feature, deciding what not to put into the product is probably going to be, way more important than what you choose to put in it, because I think great software requires constraints, because that's what leads to intuitive interactions. If you've got 20,000 options of what you can do, it may be overwhelming and hard to use. And so for us, the biggest thing was, I think of adoption as pain times frequency. If something's very painful, but you do it once a year, you're probably fine to just eat that pain. But if it's a little bit painful, but doing it 10 times a day, then okay, you're actually going to use whatever solution you sort of bring in. And I think that's what drives the difference between like a power usage and adoption, and just shelfware, where you buy it because it sounds nice in theory and the pain seems big, but you don't encounter it very often. And so for us, there were a number of things that met that criteria that we therefore decided not to ship. So things like fleet management, right? As we said, there's just not that many teams out there with huge fleets where that's the primary issue. We may do that eventually, but we really wanted to prioritize, as you said, as a startup, we really want to do 1 or 2 things really, really well. And the thing that mattered the most is the reason why, or even deployments, right? Like, there's a bunch of CI/CD style tools that are kind of trying to be Vercel for robotics. And like, how often are you doing deployments? Okay, well, maybe once a month. It's like, why is it so slow? So it's slow because you need to collect all the data, analyze the data, find opportunities to improve it, ship the fix, test the fix. So there's this whole workflow that happens. That's where 90% of the time is spent. And then there's this deployment thing at the end, which is working fine, right? You can SSH in, you SCP some files, you spin it up. There's tools that exist that kind of make it a bit easier, and you're doing it once a month. Mate, I think that's generous. You're probably doing it once every couple of months. And so as that, we would need to collapse first that data curation and analysis and QA workflow, which is where we've focused, so that gets fast, so that then you're deploying daily like we do software today. And if you're at that stage, then we can make your deployments easier. And once you're deploying, then you've got a bigger fleet and you want to manage them, and that all makes a lot of sense. And I think sequencing has been what's been really important to meet our customers where they are and what's painful and frequent.
Yeah. I love that perspective. Yeah. I hadn't actually thought about how frequent you're encountering the problem. That's
Well, I just think of it every time you run into that pain. I'd love to hear how it works for your business, but I think every time they encounter that pain, it's a moment where they remember, oh, I should think about using Alloy for this, or I need a solution for this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we get sold or that we encounter and we're like, to your point, maybe, it's a one-time setup every year or one-time usage. It's not sticky. It's in the background. Like you said, it's in the shelf. I don't have to think about it again. But then if it's something that's a daily thing as part of our actual workflow, that's an issue. that we have to overcome, for sure. Yeah, interesting. What technical? I mean, this actually might be the same answer, but I'm curious if something else. Was there any technical or product decision early on that turned out to be more important than you expected?
Yeah, all of them.
Really?
I mean, I think it's true of any company where, well, firstly, you think your initial vision will take 1 year, but it ends up being a 10-year roadmap because things are always deeper and more complex and have way more sort of meat to them than you expect. But simple things like your data schema, like how you decide to architect how you hold information. So do you decide to like we time align all the data that comes in, right? You can give us data from all these disparate sources. It can be quite unwieldy, and we time align it all, make it very nice and standard so that when you log in, you can see time slices of, hey, this is all of the data that was present at that moment. You can end up with all kinds of technical complexities around sliding window problems of like, okay, you've got 1 second chunks, but what if you want to look at a 5 or 6 second chunk? Because that's what makes the information relevant for the search or for whatever you're looking for. Because maybe if you look at 1 second of something, you just wouldn't be able to tell what it is. And so dynamic, like how big a time bucket should be, seems innocuous as a decision, but then trying to refactor that later when all of your models are trained on that, all of your algorithms are based on that, and like that's something we've had to navigate, which our customers would have needed to navigate if they had done this sort of without us. And that's one of those reasons I don't see those things as big bad issues for us. I see them as every time we have to eat one of those sort of painful pills, it's one our customers didn't have to, and it's another great reason why they should work with us versus do it themselves.
Is there a part of the product that people underestimate, do you think?
In how useful it is or how complicated it is.
Either or, you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess those things do often go hand in hand, I suppose,
Yeah.
because as we sort of alluded to, like cutting things is more powerful, but similarly, making a complex thing seem simple, so that it seems like a triviality can often, people will look at it and they'll initially go, oh, we can build this.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
obviously don't see all of the kind of, it's like the duck on the lake that looks like it's swimming smoothly and underneath the water is like swimming really, really hard.
Yeah.
And I think that, obviously there's a lot of complex, both data engineering around scale, as we're talking about, right? A gigabyte a minute rapidly scales into terabytes of data. So a lot of our customers are dealing with at least a terabyte a day, sometimes more. And so making it so that we can load that data rapidly, make sure that you can see the relevant data really, really, really fast without incurring huge amounts of data cost. Computing that and have, as I said, we like in one of these cases, we've turned a day of analysis into 10 minutes. Well, 10 minutes like that, when we first started, that took hours for the system to run through. And it's only through months and months of optimization and scaling and iteration on our data engineering that we've managed to bring that down to be so fast as that.
Nice.
And so, yeah, I think there's things like that people look at and you see the end result and you go, oh, this seems simple. We should be able to do that. And so in many of those cases, I just welcome them to and then say, like, let's just reconnect in 3 months and see if, not smugly. It's like, I really want to see
No.
maybe they do it better than me and I can learn something from them, or it's more resources that make sense to pour in on their side and we just come back as partners later.
Yeah. Yeah. Similar in the recruiting world, honestly. Sometimes you
Right.
talk about that and you're like, okay, no, yeah, fair, you can do it yourself if you, that's fine. That's why we exist, go try it. And then no harm, no foul, right? Well, we can revisit this and see if you need the help later on. But people
Yeah.
underestimate.
And I think
Always,
it's been,
you don't know what you don't know.
I'd say one of the best things so far for the company has actually just been the timing of when we started. As we sort of said initially, like if you started 5 years ago, you'd architect a very different solution. I was very backwards looking of how you used to do things, not using modern techniques and tools. But also the number of customers that exist was just far, far fewer. And even now looking forward, I kind of think about it as 99% of the sort of robotics companies that will exist don't yet exist. We're entering into this renaissance where there's more and more tools you can take off the shelf, Alloy being one of them, but there's many. To do every part of the kind of journey of starting the company, that's all the non-core things that actually isn't your core IP as a robotics company. And so, think about trying to make a software company, but there was no like AWS or, auth providers or Stripe for payments or Yeah, and you're doing all of this stuff from scratch every time, or GitHub to store your code, or these things that we just take for granted, that everyone uses as an industry standard. If none of those things existed, it would take 100 times longer to write software. And I think that's the renaissance that we're going through now as a robotics industry. And so that's why we're really excited to be part of that, is that we think that it will be easier than ever and cheaper than ever to start a robotics company over the next couple of years. And so there'll be hundreds more.
Yeah, that's the goal. That's the hope, right? Yeah. You mentioned something about the partnership element, right? Like with all of your companies or the customers that you work with, which is not 100% unique. Is a very great model to go with, especially when you're early stage and you want to refine your product and figure out, like, is this the right path, and get some real feedback. How did you validate that you were building something that people would actually pay for in the end, like going past that partnership element?
There's no fancy answer. I just made them pay.
You're like, you've had your partner window now.
Well, I think it's an important thing, right? This is something we danced with at the beginning, where you sort of imagine like you're a very, very early startup. This was a while ago now, and the first people you do interact with, you do go, oh, we can do like a free partnership, and you're finding it hard to get time in with them. There's other priorities, things shift. It's they're not necessarily that serious, but not necessarily misleading you. Just at the time, this thing is not a priority because there's no downside cost of not having engaged with it. And so I do think for them, it is actually beneficial if they invest early on, because they still have this problem and they want to solve it. And so I very quickly learned that the level of investment early on for our customers was going to be proportional to how much they had physically invested. And so we moved to paid pilots as soon as we could. And we credit that against the subsequent annual contract and all of those things. Like, it shouldn't be an additional cost, but it just shows that, hey, this is a real problem for you. You're serious about solving it, and you're serious about solving it with us. And it sets them up to actually succeed, because we do need their input to make them successful, and it doesn't take long. And so we've seen that they've massively found that, like, they get massive amounts more value out of it than the cost of the pilot, and then they're excited to convert over.
Yeah, I'm smiling because there's so many similarities to how I position when we engage with clients as well. It's so funny because there's, I don't know if you've ever worked with external recruiting companies or anything, but there's different ways, right? There's contingent, which you just pay if they fill your job. And then there's the retained model, where you have to pay a portion up front and the rest. So I don't want to go into the weeds of it, but we flip that model, but we always do high commitment paying, because you find to that point, if they've got skin in the game, they're invested, you're going to get that feedback loop. You're going to get that time and that commitment to actually do the best job you can, instead of just being like in the background and forgotten about. And if you get lucky with something, then you actually fill the role. So to your point, it's beneficial for both sides.
Absolutely, and that's why we view it as a partnership. And a lot of the time, we will lose money on the initial partnership, and that's part of it. But it's just by having them be invested to some degree. We're not asking for huge amounts. It's essentially a nominal fee, but it gets you through procurement. It gets the purse strings open. It makes sure they're serious, and it means that there can be no sort of surprise blockages later for both you and them when it comes time to actually scale up and go to production.
Sure, for sure. That's awesome. So I ask a lot of these questions because we have a lot of either first-time founders or aspiring founders that listen to the show, and they get a lot of good advice and guidance. So I've heard anyway, but if anyone else is listening, please tell me. But these are things that I'm hearing. What's one early mistake that you made that you'd absolutely warn other founders about?
I really do think we lost what I would consider like a lot of time through a lot of these, as we just were talking about, like unpaid. Hey, we'll come and we'll solve this problem for free. Like, it's such a value added offer. Why wouldn't you take it? And actually got a lot of no's around that. And I think one is it really doesn't start on an even footing. You're like, it really puts you kind of below them on this kind of dynamic, which then makes it a bit weird right away. You're like, we're kind of doing free work for you. They're not invested. I'm obviously spending headcount costs, which is not trivial. And so you are burning with like not as much learning as you would like, because you're not getting that feedback loop. But I hesitated to share that because I was lucky enough that coming into this, I had the previous thing I was doing is I joined that company, that telehealth company, at like 10 people, and was with it till 400 people. And so I got to see a lot of these, I guess, mistakes or things, and try to learn from them early. and not necessarily apply them. So from it's like we've had quite a good run in terms of doing things, I'd say, in the right order. So before I took funding, I spent a lot of time, months, meeting with sort of founders of robotics companies, lead machine learning engineers, lead robotics engineers, employing my sort of network and the VCs around my network and their network. And so I learned a lot from them to try to nail down to make sure that I, wasn't lying to myself or misleading myself that there was a big opportunity here. And a lot of those people ended up being our early design partners, not because I was hard selling them, but because I was just asking these questions about their problems. And then they were going, yeah, actually, this thing is actually a big problem for us. Do you have a solution, or will you build a solution? We think you're pretty smart. We see that every time we meet you, every couple of weeks, you've learned a lot since the last time. So the slope, if you can continue that, is impressive. And so, yeah, I think we did our due diligence there, built out that network and legitimacy before taking funding to try to then go a bit faster. And then similarly with hiring, I held off on hiring a lot because I knew that, you think you've got a full conviction in this direction, and you probably make mistakes a few times and need to pivot. And so you really want to be below, like I think Jensen has a great quote, which is that your team should only be as big as necessary and as small as possible. As big as necessary and as small as possible. And so you're really always on the edge of not having enough people, which I think creates an environment where everyone's striving, they're growing, they're having an outsized impact. It's a great culture for the team in terms of, getting to move quickly and not have heaps of meetings for alignment and stuff like that. And so, yeah, there really was this kind of phasing of we're building out validation, we're peeling the risk onion, as they say, I think at A16Z. And making sure there's a real problem here, that people were willing to pay for it, that we can build the solution to it. We built out the MVP really quickly, got that in front of customers within a month, had those people checking out. Then we started getting into these paid pilots because we had something actually to show. And so each time we were trying to, I guess, go the path of most resistance and most friction to validate and peel that risk onion as fast as possible so that we can know that we're not bullshitting ourselves, if I'm really being honest.
That's awesome. That's great feedback. That's great advice. Yeah. Let's shift gears quickly, because obviously hiring is important to me, and I'm curious. And then it's also, I believe, one of the most important things when you're building a company, as you touched on there, as big as necessary but as small as possible, which is a great viewpoint to have as well, because you can't have too much bloat, and you do really need impactful hires, right? Multipliers and people that can operate in this early scrappy but like all hands on deck stage. What were you personally prioritizing in the first people that you hired?
I would also just add that while it is super important that they can be a multiplier and impactful for us, but similarly having a small team means that they have a much more impactful time because they can own more, they can be more autonomous, they can move faster. And so just a learning curve, and they get in front of customers. They also work on the back end and the front end, the data infrastructure, the machine learning and the edge software that goes in the robots. And so the level of exposure that people get is really huge. Whereas if you rapidly grow a 10-person engineering team, you're splitting into sub teams, you're running different sprints, people are not really aware of what each other are working on, and you very rapidly fragment the context. And so I'm trying, while we're in this early phase where we want to move incredibly like a missile, we need to have lockstep everybody. So really what I was focused on when I'm recruiting the early team was firstly mission alignment. They need to be missionary. They need to care about the outcome we talked about, the abundance we want to build towards that we think will be driven through automation, and the understanding that this is a key bottleneck to that. And they're therefore, getting really stoked about who we get to work with and the types of robotics companies, which are some of the biggest names in the world now, have opened their doors and started talking to us and working with us. And that's been, for them, awesome. Whereas for someone who doesn't care about the space, that's not going to have that same impact, and therefore they're not going to be as impactful and invested. Secondly, I look for these character traits because I do believe you can teach anything technical, but you can't change someone's character. You can go crazy trying, and I've been a manager of over 100 people now at this point from my previous roles, and I've sort of seen that the successes and the failures on the hiring and the training and the firing and all of those things, which has been really awesome, sort of being able to go again from scratch. But they need to be hungry and they need to be coachable. Because I think those are the two things that I found is irreplaceable. And if they're hungry, they're going to go chase after that mission that they're aligned to as much as they can. They've got their own ambitions, and you can kind of partner with them to help them achieve those and achieve the goals of the company. But if they're hungry without being coachable, then they're going to be incredibly difficult to manage because they won't grow and they won't learn, and they'll just want results. They want the progression, the promotions, the pay rises, and all those things, but they're not getting the results because you typically, when you move into a new domain, you need to be coachable because you're going to get it wrong a bunch. And so being able to take feedback, to learn, to be self-aware. When you combine that with being hungry, you get this like rapidly growing feedback loop person. There I go, talking about feedback loops again. But yeah, that growth engine that they've built about their own personal development towards that mission aligned goal that we've all shared, that I think is just how you build that like hardcore culture of people who care deeply about the outcome.
Yeah. Sounds like maintaining speed and clarity as you guys grow as well is kind of key and embedded in your culture. If everyone has that visibility, that aligned to that mission, that drive and everything is going to be key. And having a
And if you
large
got
fragment, yeah.
Exactly. Like as soon as the
Yeah.
team gets large, and what naturally happens, right? And there's something, it's an experiment we're running around one-on-ones in that we don't have them, or as in we don't have them as a standing weekly meeting. And part of that is a selection bias. If someone hears that and they're excited, it's because they're a self-directed person that's like doesn't want to have to sit and play politics. The important side effects of that, the emergent outcomes that people don't appreciate, I think, is that I can have way more direct reports. And this is something, again, borrowed from NVIDIA. NVIDIA has this structure. And so Jensen has 40, 50 direct reports, which is obviously a very insane application of this. And those are people, top of their careers, incredibly self-reliant. But that's the idea that we're going after, is that as long as you're giving people direct feedback quickly, and that can be, either in the moment or like soon after, and you are closing the loop on compensation adjustments, rewarding high performance, and giving people more opportunities quickly. Those don't have to happen in a one-on-one. That's just a backstop that happens when you need to scale it to thousands of managers. And I think that by having me being able to, every manager, not just me, I'm the only manager right now, but there will be others. Each of them can have more reports, which means you don't need to have as deep a tree. Anyone who's done like tree theory and comp sci, if each node can have more children, then you don't need to go as deep. And so that's when you're talking about keeping alignment and context. The diffusion through the layers is where that breaks down and fragments. The culture gets confusing. You can have kind of a manager who's not aligned with the culture, who creates a subculture and all these problems. And that way, less people need to get pushed into management, so more people can be on the tools. There's a lot of positive side effects that happen because of that, and especially in this AI first era. I think this is going to be the way that most companies are going to have to go, and so we want to be on the front foot.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that theory. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. A lot of nuggets here for people to think about as they're building their companies, because it's really hard once you've got past a certain point to go back and retroactively fix this stuff.
You
right?
can't. You just, like I've been in that experience where you roll out like a performance framework because people want clarity of progression. When people request that, maybe they do. But look, most of the time what I've seen is they actually just want progression. Right, that's the outcome they want. They don't want a performance framework with really arduous like performance cycles that take a month every quarter, and are really stressful for everyone. And they still get a no. They don't get progression, but now it's just a lot of admin work and pain, and you can't take that back once you've rolled it out. And same thing with things like one-on-ones, and people just become accustomed to it, and you can't really take it back.
Yeah, I hadn't actually heard about the no one-on-ones thing. It's a pretty unique model. I think it would be hard for a lot of people to do, because they're just ingrained in like not even micromanaging, but just like fully keeping a pulse on, and relinquishing control, I think, is very tough naturally for a lot of people.
And you have to look into what the one-on-one is, because it has value. And so it's taking the things that have value and still trying to apply them, but just in a different way.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Let's look ahead for you guys, because I'm conscious of time and I want to cover a few things here. But what does the next 12 to 18 months look like for Alloy?
Yeah, well, so we've just come through this critical phase where we've been converting pilots into these customers, and having those successful stories become the case studies that then make it easier to sort of engage those next, I guess. Batch or group of prospective leads and customers and partners. And so this next 12 months is really taking, I guess, that validation that we've now seen and the success in those case studies and pushing the accelerator incredibly hard. And so, we've got our handful of customers that have scaled up with us, and the rest of the pilots that are coming through. And so the goal is to 10x those over the year. It's incredibly ambitious, but we think that that's kind of the cadence that exists. That's like the growth rate that's possible with the growth rate of the industry that we're seeing. And we see the impact that we've had, and how like we've done a lot of the work to take the raw data at the nuts and bolts so that it doesn't require much pre-processing, and then to give you like, a nice interface, a UI, such that if you wanted to, you can just like integrate with us, which takes about 15 minutes, maybe less. And then the whole thing just will work. And so it should be as little lift as possible. I think one of the main problems with a lot of the other offerings out there is they rely on a huge amount of engineering work being done by the customer, by the partner,
Yeah.
to actually make it work. So it's like, hey,
Yeah.
we're giving you this like framework, and not naming names, but it's like maybe it's just Dockerizing Python scripts that you write as the customer and then running them in a pipeline and then giving you the outputs. And it's like, it's interesting. It's kind of like a DevOps feature, but it means that I'm not going to be able to detect failures that I didn't know to get coverage on. Which
Right.
that's a fundamental strategic issue with that product, in my opinion.
Interesting.
And yeah, so stuff like that, where we've thought quite deeply about it, we really just want to be pressing go. So that's why we're hiring. We're wanting to add a couple of additional heads now. But that, like as I say, I think we can do a lot with a little. And so it's going to be like, I guess, competitive to get these few spots. It's like teams are going to be smaller than ever, and that's a broad prediction I think about most companies. The best roles are going to be harder to get and be more competitive on the demand side.
Yeah, you've definitely seen that. Definitely seen that in the market for sure, even though there's still like, I want to say, a shortage of amazing talent that's actually out there open and looking. The bar is a lot higher from from the client standpoint. Sort of in line with that and what you shared about the next 12 to 18 months, is there an inflection point that you're most excited or even nervous about?
I mean, the groundswell around VLAs, whether VLAs end up being the architecture that or like becomes the foundation model for robotics. But even if it's not, I think just on that pathway, we'll unlock whatever that next architectural decision is.
Yeah.
But that shift where you sort of now it feels like you're going to have this watershed moment where you've got these kind of pre-VLA companies and post-VLA companies. And I'm broadly still very bullish on specialized robotics. I'm not necessarily thinking that like humanoids are going to be here in 1 year and just sweep the floor. Like, think a lot of the people we work with in maritime, are you going to put a humanoid swimming in the water? Probably not, right? So like, there's definitely going to remain a set of things that just don't make sense to be a humanoid forever. And so in the meantime, I do think there's an inflection point where foundation models take a lot of that basic training and the basic kind of work that goes into getting to a certain level, and then you're going to need to just take that and build on top of it. We're still really relevant at good building for that future where the inputs and the outputs are the same. You just have a slightly different brain in the middle. We're still happy to work with that data, right? Whether it's image data going in or it's actuation data going out, we can work with any of it because we capture the whole ROS bag, the whole file. But I do think that's exciting and will cause a lot of change.
Awesome. And finally, if Alloy is wildly successful and you guys do everything that you set out to do, what does that success actually look like?
In the meantime, right, we're helping teams to find these issues and do the feedback loop internally with their teams. But we want to also just be a partner where we're finding either proposing fixes or shipping fixes to these things as well. And so you kind of can have that whole feedback loop, and augmenting that over time, you end up with a system where we can partner with teams to actually solve problems, not necessarily just flag them. But this is, we're talking the future vision of what could be possible. But for, it's a future where, there's probably 1 trillion robots out there in the world, and they're all needing to learn from experience. And that's something that requires you to have the best way to interpret robot data and understand it. We sort of have like an internal line, which is your robot speaks and we listened. And that's really what we're here to do. So we'll have the best interpretation system for robotics data, and we'll be thinking of the best way to apply that. But that's the future that we want.
Awesome. Well, look, this has been great, Joe. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and your insight and advice, and then also give us all the in-depth knowledge of Alloy and everything you guys are building. It's super exciting and obviously very relevant in the market right now. So thank you for building it.
No, of course. And thanks for having me. And obviously, if people want to follow along, would love if they can find me personally on Twitter, or follow the company account on LinkedIn. But we are hiring. And as I say, I do split my time between Australia and San Francisco. So if people are in either of those markets, I'd love to hear from them.
Amazing. Before you go, what roles are you actually hiring for right now?
predominantly engineering, but later this year we'll have a shift towards sort of forward deployed engineering and customer success. As we start, we're already sort of, it's already a lot of customers to manage, which is a great problem to have. But as we go into the second half of the year, we're definitely going to need to build out more of a team in that side of the business.
And the team's split between Sydney and the Bay Area?
It's Sydney right now.
Or will be? And then, okay, cool. Awesome. Well, look, we're going to link all of these things in the show notes to make it easy for everyone else, and including your website and stuff and your careers page. So that is great stuff. Thank you again. And I look forward to keeping in touch and seeing everything that you guys build.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Greg.
My pleasure.